Okay, I read this book with a weird cover and kind of a funny name that has a 2.9 star rating on Goodreads. Why? Why would I do that and then make a focused review video about it? Well, for good reason. But before I get into that, thank you guys for tuning in today. I appreciate you all giving me a little time out of your busy days to discuss this book review of Advent 9 by T. Alan Horne, which I'm going to be splitting up into a spoiler-free first couple of minutes, followed by a spoiler-laden full book review for the remainder of the video. Depending on whether or not you might want to try your hand reading this one, or would consider gifting it, which I think is a great idea, as this book makes a, I think, great gift for a particular reader in your life. Getting started, I would classify Advent 9 as young adult fantasy, which is a genre I rarely pick up. So you can trust you're getting a pretty fresh take on my perspective of this one. The story revolves around Advent 9, a teenage boy who is the last powered, aka superhero, to exist in his world. A near-future speculative fiction kind of Earth, West Coast, United States, with some hints appearing throughout the book as to the focal Hearth City's real-world analog location. The inciting action is Advent 9's rivalry with his arch-nemesis, Dr. Antiworld, whose latest plot to bring down the hero involves opening a multi-dimensional rift through which Advent 9's opposite, kind of an anti-self, kind of like supervillain, Trance Dragon, appears to wreak havoc and destroy the world. The journey Advent 9 then goes on to overcome himself. As you can see on the cover, there's kind of his opposite right there, is one worth embarking upon as the reader. And as a little aside, one of the things that jumped out to me about this book and got my attention initially was that it was edited by fantasy legend David Farland, and the audiobook version of this is read by the infamous Michael Kramer. Some big names, to be sure, and who doesn't love listening to Michael Kramer read a book? I read this one physically, but then went back afterwards and listened to snippets of Kramer's recording, and he gives his usual 5-star performance. So the book's biggest and only real downside, I would say, is there's a bit of sudden and unexpected violence toward the beginning of the book here, incited by the supervillain, but it is violence the degree to which you don't typically find in young adult novels, unless you're reading The Hunger Games, I guess. And I can understand what the author's trying to do here by establishing the supervillain's cruelty and heartlessness, really making him a villain. And yeah, it doesn't really kind of appear in the book after that. But do be forewarned on that front. Now, Horne writes this with a really unique voice, which I thought was good and enjoyable and quality. And I have to argue with anyone that says this book isn't well written. This book is not poorly written. It is just somewhat oddly written in a comic book superhero style, which could throw the reader off if you're not really accustomed to reading comic books or graphic novels, because while this is a 525-page prose novel, it is very much written in the style of a comic book. There is even a sequence of dialogue about comic books toward the beginning of the novel here that is an explicit nod at the sort of superhero punk genre format that the author is writing in. But then, in and of itself, just to say that the book is written like a comic book doesn't fully encapsulate what I'm meaning when I say the book is uniquely written. To further describe that, we are going to jump into the spoiler section of this video. The book starts off slightly confusing, but it's not the world of Hearth City or the story or the other characters that are confusing. It's the hero or superhero himself and the entire why around why he's doing what he's doing. Now, full disclosure, I didn't do any research on this book prior to reading it beyond just pretty engaging, interesting sounding synopsis. Let me tell you, the whole book makes a lot more sense if you do a little bit of research before jumping in on like an Amazon or Goodreads review, but I would not recommend that. I'd recommend grabbing a copy for yourself and going in with fresh eyes for yourself for the full enjoyment that this story has to offer. Or if you just want to keep watching the rest of this video, that's fine, because you'll get about halfway through the book and a big bombshell revelation is dropped on the reader as to what's really going on here, which is that the superhero and protagonist, Advent 9, is quite autistic. Now, I don't know much about Horne's background with autism, but I can say that he writes the protagonist character in a very convincing, realistic way that makes the protagonist very relatable and easy to resonate with as the reader. Not that I have any authority to declare what is or isn't an appropriate representation of autism, but I can say how he engages on the subject matter is very skillful and tasteful, and overall I'd say he gives it a very complex, thorough treatment. Because reading this one, you begin to see that Advent 9's autism is both the source of his extraordinary superhero powers and simultaneously a personal limitation or obstacle which he must overcome in order to grapple with the conflict at hand, the fate of the world hanging in the balance. In fact, without this explanation of Advent 9's autism, the reader is left a little unmoored through the first half of the book, which is not to say that, hints aren't dropped. You can begin guessing at what's really going on as you go. It doesn't really detract fully from the story. Should someone read this book just because it has an autistic main character? No, not necessarily. No, because it is not the main point of the story, perhaps. Rather, you should read this or give this book as a gift if there is for the reader some interest in superhero comics, as that is much more of the prevalent tone and focus of this story, and one which is rare in modern kind of fiction, sci-fi, fantasy, prose text. And that connection is almost a no-brainer when you start to think about it more, right? If you've ever read superhero comics or have watched the DC or Marvel movies, there is something to superheroes that, if not explicitly autistic, we might consider neurodivergent or otherwise, kind of an outsider, outlier personality that doesn't quite fit so nicely into society. Very cool to see that story discussed in a honestly fresh perspective. Advent 9 stands up in his own power as a realistically crafted, multifaceted, complex character. And there's nothing tropish about him or his powers, which are, effectively, his emotions externalized as these little flying mammalian creatures that you can see here, maybe better on the back cover. And only he can see them, but when they go into him, he experiences those emotions profoundly and is imbued with unique supernormal powers. So pretty cool, honestly. Not your normal superhero story. And I don't know, I guess just, it's also pretty cool that it looks like after now doing a little bit more research on the book, this is a self-published one. How cool is that in the post-COVID world, people are still getting quality works out there, self-published. Bravo to Horne and everyone else who's doing that. Truly. I don't cover a lot of self-published books here on my channel, but, let's hope that maybe this is the start of something new, because I thoroughly enjoyed this one. Are any of you avid readers of self-published works? Because I would read more after this, and will welcome any recommendations. Now, I need to take a minute to say here, as I mentioned at the start of the video, that after finishing this, I went on Goodreads and noticed this book had a 2.6 star rating. Why? out of 5 stars? This is something I must discuss. While, fortunately, it had a 4.4 star rating on Amazon, which it much more appropriately deserves. I would personally say it's somewhere between a 4 and a 4.5 star for me, genuinely. Particularly owing to its satisfying conclusion to the enemies to friends, mentor-disciple storyline between Advent 9 and Dr. Felix Antiworld. Nevertheless, seeing this, I immediately rated this a 5 star on Goodreads to attempt to lift its undeservedly low rating. And again, I've spoken about this in other videos, but what is going on with Goodreads? Why are people so unnecessarily harsh in their reviews and ratings on the platform? I see a lot of Goodreads users reviewing books by using just an unnecessarily harsh critique and very subjective opinions. And honestly, I feel like this is one of the big things that's wrong with the contemporary American reading community. I'll get on my soapbox for a minute and just say, it feels to me like it is rife with elitism and exclusivity, which is fine if you're in academia or higher education, as that's part of that. But for a book that's intended for an audience of teenage or YA readers who are fans of superhero comics, I mean, come on. Like, come on. I don't know. Am I way off base here? What do you guys think? Anyways, please do go check this one out. It is a light, fun, enjoyable read that has a powerful internal journey for the hero that I don't think you'll regret if you undertake it. It's also just refreshing to see how neurodivergence is treated in the way that it is here. Honestly, something I can appreciate. I do also believe that the epilogue of this book is leaving room open for a possible follow-up sequel that I do hope offers us a little more expanded vision of the world. And as mentioned, the audiobook is also very high quality thanks to Kramer's professional expertise. Have you read it? Let me know what you think. I would love to see if there's any community out here on YouTube around this book. Thank you so much for tuning in. I really appreciate you guys. Also, feel free to like or subscribe below if you've found any enjoyment or value in this, and we'll look forward to seeing you guys next time. All right.